If there's one thing you can rely on in the universe, it's that someone, somewhere, is trying to kill you. On the living space station Kursk Aegis, that someone happened to be a bunch of aliens with a penchant for biological warfare. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, let's meet Dr. Celine Voss. Celine had a face that could launch 1,000 ships, assuming those ships were piloted by people who loved sarcasm and had a penchant for masochism. "Why are we here again?" she asked, kicking an empty food canister across the grimy floor of Lab 4. It clattered away, echoing through the sterile corridor like a dying robot trying to sing karaoke. "Because the universe hates us," replied Anton, a man whose resting face was permanently set to mildly offended. "And apparently, because there's something down here that wants to make our brains leak out of our ears." "Oh great, I was worried today was going to be boring," Celine said, rolling her eyes. "Tell me again why we decided to poke around in alien tech instead of, I don't know, watching paint dry." "Because watching paint dry doesn't pay the bills," chimed in Mira, the station's resident optimist. Her idea of a good time involved cataloging alien pathogens and smiling about it. "And because, believe it or not, some of us like being alive. Well, I might reconsider if my options are this or dying a horrible death by alien goo," Anton muttered, peering at the equipment. The lab was filled with more strange alien gadgets than a sci-fi convention gone wrong. Half the stuff looked like it belonged in a torture chamber designed by a minimalist with an overactive imagination. Celine approached what could only be described as a glowing, organic blob. It pulsed gently, like it was contemplating lunch and had just realized it was starving. "What do you make of this, Mira?" she asked. "Looks like someone crossed a jellyfish with a nightmare," Mira replied cheerfully, tapping the side of the container. "But according to the scans, it's some sort of bio-weapon. Designed to spread fast, kill faster, lovely," Celine sighed. "Remind me to write a thank you note to our alien friends for sharing their delightful toys. Don't worry, I'm sure the card section has something for thanks for the mass extinction event," Anton quipped, giving the blob the stink eye. Just then, the comms unit buzzed to life, a crackly voice breaking through the static. "Hey team, this is Captain Jax. How's the alien artifact discovery party going? Found anything that'll save us from the terrifying void of space?" "Oh, just your average run-of-the-mill doomsday device," Celine replied. "Next week's special, intergalactic plagues and their uses in home decor." "Well, aren't you full of sunshine?" Jax's voice crackled back. "Just make sure whatever you do, don't break it." "I kind of prefer my insides where they are, thanks. No promises," said Anton. "I always wanted to see what my spleen looked like on the outside." Celine turned back to the glowing blob. "All right, team. Let's get to work. I'd rather not be the punchline of some alien joke because we couldn't handle a little biological warfare." "What's the worst that could happen?" Mira asked, her optimism bordering on insanity. Anton snorted. "I don't know, Mira. Maybe we could all die horribly and our corpses used as decorations for the next alien holiday. The thing about sarcasm is, it tends to mask how much you really care." Celine cared, probably too much, and that's why she was here, poking at dangerous things that could end humanity as they knew it. She carefully approached the alien device, her mind racing through possibilities. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn this weapon into something useful. Like a cure, or better yet, a deterrent. If we could reverse engineer this, she mused aloud, we could potentially use it to protect ourselves. Or at the very least, keep others from using it against us. And how exactly do you propose we do that without turning into glorified lab rats? Anton asked, skepticism dripping from every word. Celine shrugged. Trial and error mostly. Emphasis on the error, knowing our luck. You know, your motivational speeches are really something else, Anton said, rolling his eyes. You're welcome, Celine grinned. Now let's roll up our sleeves and get to it. We've got a universe to save from itself. As they worked, the hours slipped by, punctuated by Mira's cheerfulness, Anton's grumbling, and the ever-present hum of the station's life support systems. It was almost enough to make Celine forget they were sitting on a time bomb. Almost. "How's it going over there, Mira?" Celine asked, wiping sweat from her brow. "Oh, you know," Mira replied, "just another day dissecting alien tech. I'm thinking of putting it on my resume under hobbies." "Good idea." Right between baking and fighting off cosmic horrors, Celine quipped. The door slid open with a metallic hiss, and Captain Jax himself strode in, looking every bit the part of a man who hadn't seen a good night's sleep in weeks. "How's our miracle team doing?" he asked, his voice as rough as sandpaper. "We're still alive, so that's a start," Anton replied, leaning against a console. "And we haven't blown up the station yet, which is always a bonus," Mira added brightly. Jax chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. "Well, keep at it. If anyone can turn a weapon of mass destruction into something useful, it's you three." "No pressure," Celine said dryly, making a note on her datapad. As Jax turned to leave, an alarm blared, loud enough to wake the dead or at least make them consider hitting the snooze button. "What now?" Celine groaned. Mira checked the console. "We've got an anomaly," she said, her voice suddenly serious. "Something's messing with the station's systems. It's like the alien tech is waking up." "Great. Just what we needed," Anton muttered. Celine took a deep breath. "All right, team, buckle up. Looks like the universe just threw us a curveball." With the alarm still blaring and the station lights flickering like a strobe at the worst rave ever, they got to work. Whatever was happening, it wasn't going to wait. "Any bright ideas?" Anton asked, fingers flying over his console. "Just one," Celine replied. "Don't die." "Excellent plan," Mira said cheerfully. "I'll be sure to stick to it." They worked furiously, trying to stabilize the systems, but the alien tech seemed to have other plans. The station shuddered as if it were laughing at their attempts, a slow rumble that echoed through the halls. "Maybe it's time we rethink our career choices," Anton suggested, only half joking. "And do what?" "Open a space coffee shop," Celine shot back. "I make a mean cup of joe," he grinned. "Focus, children," Jax barked, re-entering the lab. "We've got a potential catastrophe, and I'd rather not spend my last moments thinking about overpriced lattes." Celine was about to retort when the station went dark. For a moment, the only sound was their breathing, harsh and ragged in the sudden silence. Then, with a flicker, the emergency lights kicked in, bathing the lab in a sickly red glow. "I don't know about you," Celine said, her voice bouncing off the walls, "but I've always found red to be very motivational in times of crisis." "Tops my list," Anton agreed. "Right up there with maniacal cackling." Mira glanced at the alien blob, which was now pulsating with a rhythm that suggested it was having a grand old time. "You think it's trying to communicate?" she asked. "I dunno," Celine shrugged. "But if it starts singing, I'm out." They worked in tense silence, the air heavy with unspoken worries and gallows humor. Each of them knew the stakes, even if they refused to admit it out loud. With a final few keystrokes, Mira managed to stabilize the station's systems, at least for the moment. The alarm's blare eased to a more tolerable hum, and the lights flickered back to life, though still dim and flickering like a budget horror film. "Well, that was fun," Celine said, stepping back from the console. "Let's never do it again." "Agreed," Anton said. "Next time, I vote we let the aliens have the station. I'm sure they'd love it here. Not that they'd appreciate the decor," Mira added with a grin. Jax shook his head, a weary smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "You three are insane, you know that. It's part of our charm," Celine said, winking. But as they stood there, catching their breath and trading barbs, the alien blob continued to pulse ominously, as if plotting its next move. Whatever this alien tech was, it wasn't finished with them yet. Not by a long shot. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Celine couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get a whole lot worse. The Kursk Aegis was having one of those days where everything was just a half step away from catastrophic, and the universe, as usual, was laughing its ass off. "Doctor." Celine Voss stared at the alien blob, now pulsating with a rhythm that could imply anything from "I'm hungry" to "I'm plotting your demise, puny humans." It was moments like these that Celine questioned her career choices. But then again, if she wanted it easy, she would have stayed on Earth, teaching bored undergrads about the life cycle of dust mites. The comms unit crackled again, this time with a tone that suggested someone somewhere had decided to spice up their misery. "This is K-Tar of the Vierks Collective. Return our technology or face obliteration." "Well, that's new," Anton said, not even bothering to sound surprised. "It's been a whole week since someone last threatened to wipe us from existence." "I was beginning to feel unwanted. Tell them to take a number and get in line," Celine muttered, glancing at the others. Mira was busily cataloging something that looked suspiciously like alien dandruff. She was probably the only one genuinely excited about the Vierks' displeasure. Celine pressed the comms button, her voice dripping with enough sarcasm to drown a cynic. "K-Tar, darling, thanks for calling. Sorry, we're fresh out of gift wrap, but I'm sure we can work something out. How about a lovely fruit basket instead?" The alien voice on the other end was as devoid of humor as a funeral dirge. "We require the immediate return of our bioweapons. Failure to comply will result in your extermination." "Wow. They've really nailed that customer service tone," Anton said, leaning back in his chair like he was watching a favorite rerun. "Want me to tell them about the extended warranty option?" Celine let out a breath, her mind racing. The Vierks were known for their lack of patience and even less sense of humor. Their idea of diplomacy usually involved a lot of explosions and a distinct lack of survivors. "Look, K-Tar," she said, "this isn't just a run-of-the-mill exchange. We're trying to stop this thing from turning the galaxy into a giant petri dish of doom." "Your attempts are futile," K-Tar replied, voice as warm as a glacier. "Return our technology or face consequences." Celine muted the comms and turned to the others. "Suggestions?" Besides the usual try-not-to-die plan, Mira tilted her head, her eternal optimism gleaming like a beacon of "we're all going to be fine." "We could try to learn more about their biology. Maybe there's something in their physiology that ties into the weapon." "Fantastic," Anton said dryly. "Let's piss off the aliens even more while we're at it. Maybe they'll invite us to their annual Destroy the Humans gala." Jax paced the length of Lab 4, every step a testament to his growing frustration. "We can't just hand it back and hope for the best," he said. "If we give them what they want, who's to say they won't just blow us to bits for fun?" Celine nodded. "Exactly. And as much as I love being on the receiving end of intergalactic threats, I'd rather see if we can't turn this thing to our advantage." "Ah, the old turn the doomsday weapon into something useful gambit," Anton said. "Always a classic." Celine returned her attention to the still-pulsing blob. "If we can figure out how this thing works, maybe we can develop a countermeasure. Or at the very least learn how to disarm it." "And how do you suggest we do that?" Jax asked, his skepticism palpable. "Trial and error, obviously," Celine replied with a smirk. "And a lot of luck, but mostly I intend to bluff our way through this until we can find a solution." "Your confidence is overwhelming," Anton said, sarcasm dialed up to 11. "Thank you." "I do try." Celine unmuted the comms. "K-Tar, as much as we'd love to play fetch, we're unfortunately tied up at the moment. But rest assured, we're working on a solution that doesn't involve turning us into space debris." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Celine thought the Vierks had simply hung up, tired of human antics. But then K-Tar's voice returned, laced with impatience. "You have 24 Earth hours before we take action." Celine let the silence hang for a moment, then replied, 24 hours. What happened to the good old alien tradition of right here, right now?" "Consider it a courtesy," K-Tar said, as if bestowing a great honor. "Much appreciated," Celine said, deadpan. "We'll be sure to send a thank you card. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have some doomsday prepping to do." With the comms connection severed, Celine took a deep breath. "All right, team, let's figure out how to turn this nightmare into something less terminal. I'll start with the biological analysis." Mira said, her excitement palpable. "If we crack their biology, we might find a way to neutralize the weapon." "I'm going to check the station's defenses," Jax added. "We might need all the protection we can muster if this turns into a firefight. And I guess that leaves me babysitting the blob," Anton said, not sounding thrilled. "Lovely." As they settled into their respective tasks, Celine felt the familiar pulse of adrenaline, that mix of fear and determination that always hit her when the stakes were highest. The universe may hate them and someone might always be trying to kill them, but they were still breathing. For now, at least. Iors melted away, each tick of the clock a reminder of their dwindling time. Mira was elbows deep in alien samples, her enthusiasm for pathogens undiminished despite the grim circumstances. "Fascinating stuff," she murmured, eyes gleaming behind her goggles. "Their cellular structure is incredibly resilient, almost like it's designed to adapt to different environments." "Great," Anton muttered. "So it's not just us they can kill efficiently, it's everyone." "Think of it as universal equality," Celine said with a sardonic grin. "No one's left out." Jax returned, looking like he'd just wrestled a particularly nasty space octopus. "Defense systems are as ready as they'll ever be, which is to say not very." "Perfect," Celine said, her tone as dry as a desert. "We're in the best possible hands." Anton leaned back in his chair, cracking his knuckles with an air of resignation. "So, we're going to antagonize a race of aliens with a weapon that could turn us into glowing piles of regret, and our plan is—" "What?" "Hope they get bored, pretty much," Celine replied. "Though I'm banking on us figuring out how to turn this thing off before they have the chance." "Optimistic," Jax commented, arms crossed. "Or suicidal. Hard to tell with you, Celine." "Don't worry, I confuse myself sometimes too." They continued working, each of them acutely aware that the Vyerks wouldn't hesitate to make good on their threat. Time was running out faster than a cheap hovercar on a downhill slope, and none of them were keen on being the universe's next cautionary tale. As the Iors ticked by, Mira finally looked up from her terminal, an expression of cautious triumph on her face. "I think I've got something," she said, gesturing for the others to gather around. "The Vyerk's biology has a vulnerability. Their cells can't handle certain frequencies of sound. If we can replicate that, it might destabilize the weapon." "That's great, Mira," Anton said, genuine admiration in his voice. "But how do we play a tune that only they can hear?" "Leave that to me," Celine said, a plan forming in her mind. "We use the station's communication systems to broadcast the frequency. If we're lucky, it'll disrupt their connection to the weapon." "Lucky," Jax echoed, shaking his head. "This whole plan is a series of ifs and maybes." "Well, what's life without a little uncertainty?" Celine replied. "Besides, it's either this or we try out for the galaxy's worst death scene." With no time to lose, they set to work on the new plan. Jax rerouted the station's comms while Mira fine-tuned the frequency, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who'd spent too many long nights in labs like this one. Anton continued his vigil over the blob, which had started to quiver as if sensing the impending threat. "I don't think it likes what we're doing," he noted, eyeing the blob warily. "Too bad," Celine said, not bothering to hide her grin. "It's either them or us, and I'm rather fond of the human race." Finally, they were ready. The equipment hummed with potential energy as they prepared to broadcast the frequency. "Okay," Celine said, taking a deep breath. "Let's see if we can't give our Vyerk's friends a little something to think about." Mira activated the broadcast, and the station trembled slightly as the sound wave rippled through the hull. For a moment nothing happened, and Celine felt her heart drop. Then slowly the alien blob began to shudder violently, as if caught in some invisible storm. Lights flickered, and the lab was filled with a low hum that made the hair on the back of Celine's neck stand on end. "It's working," Mira whispered, not daring to hope. The blob's movements became increasingly erratic, its form distorting and collapsing in on itself like a deflated balloon. Celine held her breath, watching as the weapon that had threatened to end them was reduced to a harmless puddle of goo. "Well," Anton said, a note of disbelief in his voice. That actually worked. Of course it did, Celine said, though her relief was palpable. Never doubt the power of a well-placed sound wave. Jax let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Looks like we've bought ourselves some time. For now, Celine agreed, knowing full well that the Vyerks wouldn't take this defeat lightly. But for the moment they were alive, and that was more than enough. The comms unit crackled to life, Katar's voice crackling with fury. "You insolent creatures! You will pay for this." Yeah, Celine replied, the weariness in her voice giving way to defiance. "Get in line, we'll be waiting." As the connection severed, the four of them sat in silence, each contemplating what came next. They'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. And as much as Celine hated to admit it, she couldn't wait to see what new hell the universe would throw at them next. At least they'd face it together. "Drink, anyone?" Anton asked, breaking the silence with a wry smile. "I'll take two," Celine replied, the tension easing as they allowed themselves a moment of levity. And so, with a shared sense of camaraderie and the weight of impending doom hanging over them, they prepared for whatever lay ahead. The universe might hate them, but they weren't going down without a fight. The Kursk Aegis was a delightful little slice of impending doom, the kind of place where the lights flickered just enough to keep you guessing if it was a power issue or a cosmic prank. The station's ecosystem was supposed to be stable. It had all the charm of a prison cell, but with more recycled air and less chance of shanking. Unfortunately, someone's cosmic joke included alien bioweapons destabilizing everything. Celine Voss, never one to miss a chance at playing savior, stared at the readings on her terminal with the kind of grim determination usually reserved for people cutting their own bangs. "Well, this is just perfect," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that could peel paint. "Not only do we have to worry about the Vyerks, but now our own station's turning against us. Like living with your in-laws," Anton quipped, not looking up from the cards he was shuffling. "Except the in-laws can kill you with spores." Jax, ever the optimist, was busy inspecting the air vents with a suspicious eye, convinced they'd be the first to betray them. "You know, I always wanted to die of asphyxiation," he said, testing the airflow with a hand. "Just never thought it'd be my own air supply." "Don't worry," Mira chirped, her enthusiasm as unyielding as ever. "I'm sure the pathogen will just make us all terribly sick before it actually kills us." "Comforting," Celine said, tapping a few keys on her terminal to pull up more data. "According to this, we've got a new strain of pathogen spreading faster than a rumor at a middle school dance." "Any chance it's actually helpful?" Anton asked, dealing out a poker hand with the focus of someone ignoring the apocalypse. "Sure," Celine replied dryly. "If you consider death a kind of eternal vacation." The air took on a heavier quality, the kind that suggested something was amiss, besides the obvious. The station's environmental controls were struggling, and that struggle echoed through the corridors with a low, ominous hum. "Can we get a mechanic in here?" Anton joked, flicking a card across the table. "Or is that too much to ask from the universe today?" Celine smirked. "I think the universe is busy planning our next disaster." Jax, who'd moved to the terminal to monitor the pathogen spread, didn't look any happier. "It's like a plague parade," he announced. "And we've got front row seats. Any chance we can sell those?" Mira asked, not entirely joking. "Make a quick buck before we all collapse." "Not unless there's a market for infectious diseases," Celine replied. Which, knowing the universe, there probably is. The air scrubbers clanked noisily, their usual hums turning into groans that sounded like a dying animal. The lab was dim, shadows lurking in corners like unwanted guests. It wasn't just the atmosphere that felt heavy. The knowledge that the Vyerk's weapon they just neutralized was only part of the problem was pressing down like a particularly miserable gravity well. Mira, always quick with a hypothesis, tapped a finger on her chin. "The pathogen's adapting rapidly. We need to create a countermeasure before it locks us down." "Another day in paradise," Anton muttered, dealing another hand of solitaire, a game only he seemed to be winning. Why not just add it to our ever-growing to-do list? Celine rolled her eyes, but there was affection in it. Right after we save the station and avoid becoming alien fertilizer, I'll get right on that. Mira's terminal beeped urgently, flashing red like an overdue library book. I might have something, she said, scanning the data with the excitement of a kid who just found contraband candy. The strain has a weakness to extreme cold. Perfect, Jax said, sarcasm dripping like oil. Should be easy to pull off in a spaceship's climate-controlled environment. Actually, Celine interjected, her mind racing, we might be able to force a cold shock through the system. If we can drop the temperature fast enough, we could neutralize the pathogen. And turn us into popsicles, Anton added, ever helpful. Small price to pay for not dying of alien flu, Mira said, already typing furiously. Besides, I like the cold. It's refreshing, Celine sighed, leaning back in her chair. All right, team. Let's see if we can't convince the station to chill out. Jax nodded, though his expression suggested he'd rather face an airlock without a suit. I'll reroute power to the coolants, but if this doesn't work, we're gonna be very fashionable ice sculptures. Anton snorted, sliding his cards back into a neat pile. Fitting end for a bunch of nobodies in the middle of nowhere. While Mira and Jax scrambled to adjust the station's cooling systems, Celine monitored the pathogen spread. The station was a patchwork of failing systems and angry beeps, the kind of place that made you question every career choice that led you here. How long do you think we've got before things get really dicey? Anton asked, watching Mira work with the kind of interest usually reserved for watching someone else defuse a bomb. Depends on your definition of dicey, Celine replied, adjusting her glasses. If you mean choking on our own atmosphere, we've got about an hour. Faster than my last breakup, Anton said, earning a chuckle from Jax. The chill began to seep into the lab as Mira finished her input. Frost crept along the walls, the temperature dropping with an alarming swiftness that made Celine's breath mist in front of her. Well, she said, rubbing her arms, if this doesn't work, at least we won't feel it when the station implodes. Comforting, Jax said, adjusting his coat. The lab's lights flickered, casting erratic shadows as the station creaked and moaned. The cold was biting, the kind of chill that seeped into bones and made you nostalgic for sunburns. All right, Celine said, teeth chattering slightly. Let's hope this doesn't kill us before the pathogen does. The room plunged into an uncomfortable silence, the kind usually reserved for funerals or family dinners. The only sound was the labored breathing of the environmental systems, struggling to keep pace with the sudden demand. Mira watched the data streams with a focused intensity, her fingers a blur across the keys. We should see results any minute now, she muttered, as much to herself as anyone else. Or we'll just see our own breath for the last time, Anton quipped, tucking his hands into his armpits for warmth. Minutes ticked by with the speed of a snail on tranquilizers, each second feeling like a year of its own. Celine watched the pathogen map, the red lines of infection slowly retreating, each receding line a tiny victory. It's working, Mira said, her voice tinged with relief. The pathogen's weakening. We might actually survive this. Jax let out a low whistle, shaking his head. I'll be damned. We might just pull through. Celine allowed herself a small smile, though the job was far from done. All right, team, let's not freeze to death before we can celebrate. Anton stood, his chair scraping across the floor. So, what's next? More alien shenanigans, or can we call it a day? As long as we're stuck here, there's always going to be something, Celine replied. But for now, let's focus on keeping the station running and the Viarcs off our backs. The cold continued to bite, but the knowledge that it was saving their lives made it feel a little less harsh. They'd won another battle against the universe's seemingly endless attempts to snuff them out, but Celine knew better than to believe it was over. The Viarcs were still out there, and they'd undoubtedly be back, angrier and more determined. But for the moment, the Kursk Aegis held together. The crew was alive, if a little frostbitten, and the universe hadn't succeeded in offing them just yet. Anyone up for a celebratory drink? Anton asked, ever the optimist when it came to finding reasons for alcohol. "Definitely," Celine said, adjusting her glasses with a smirk. "I think we've earned a little something to warm us up." And with that, they made their way toward the mess hall, the path a little lighter despite the chill. Because if they were going to keep fighting against the cosmos, they might as well do it with a drink in hand and a smile, albeit a grim one, on their faces. In the cold, hostile expanse of space, sometimes all you had was the warmth of camaraderie and the promise of surviving just one more day. Celine Voss was beginning to think that the Kursk Aegis was less a space station and more a halfway house for broken dreams and questionable sanity. With the cold still nipping at her as she trudged through the corridors towards Lab 4, she couldn't help but wonder if she'd made a wrong turn somewhere in her career path, one that had led her straight to this icy inconvenience. "Hey, Celine," Jax called, his voice carrying a false cheerfulness that usually indicated bad news. He caught up to her in the corridor, his breath forming little puffs. "You heard about Terk's latest bright idea, do I want to?" Celine asked, eyeing him with the kind of suspicion reserved for used starship salesmen. Jax chuckled, rubbing his hands together. "He wants to use black hole technology to stabilize the ecosystem. Because that's never gone wrong before," Celine muttered, rolling her eyes. "Didn't we have a lecture on things not to mess with, and wasn't miniature black holes #1? "Yup," Jax replied, grinning. "Right after don't eat the glowing food. Speaking of glowing, how's the pathogen holding up?" Celine asked, because if the station wasn't trying to freeze them, it was probably trying to infect them. "Still hanging in there like an unwanted houseguest." Jax shrugged. "Mira's monitoring it, but she says it's like playing whack-a-mole with a blindfold." "Great," Celine said, her voice dripping with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax audits. "And the Vyerks, still demanding their toys back. Apparently they've never heard the word wait. Why am I not surprised?" Celine sighed, rubbing her temples. "Remind me again why we're not just giving them what they want and calling it a day." "Oh, because then they'd kill us anyway," Jax replied with a grin that implied he'd already accepted his fate. "And where's the fun in that?" Celine shook her head as they reached Lab 4. Inside, Anton and Mira were engaged in a fierce debate, one that probably had more to do with personal grudges than science. "I'm telling you it's not going to work," Anton was saying, waving a hand dismissively. "Black holes and life support don't mix. It's like setting a plasma grenade to simmer." Mira crossed her arms, looking like a teacher disappointed in lazy students. "And I'm telling you it's the only option that will buy us enough time." "Time to what? Become cosmic spaghetti?" Anton shot back, leaning against a terminal. "Or time to find a better solution," Celine chimed in, trying to play peacemaker. "Assuming we don't implode first." "Great," Anton muttered, turning back to his cards. "First we freeze. Now we get crushed. All we need is fire and we've got the full apocalypse package. Guess we'll just have to see if Terk's idea doesn't get us killed," Mira said, her voice laced with determination. "He's meeting with the Vyerks rep soon to explain our plan. Maybe they'll give us some breathing room." "Breathing room?" Anton snorted. "Vyerks don't do breathing room, they do annihilation." "Maybe they'll be too busy laughing at us to pull the trigger," Jax suggested, his optimism once again clashing with reality. Celine decided it was time to get a handle on the situation before it spiraled out of control. "All right, let's get Terk in here. I need to know exactly how this isn't going to kill us." "On it," Jax said, heading off to find the engineer. While they waited, Mira began fiddling with the terminal, her fingers dancing across the keys with the grace of someone who'd done this far too many times. "If we can divert power from non-essential systems, we might be able to boost the shields around the ecosystem." "Non-essential systems like heating?" Anton asked with a smirk. "Exactly," Mira replied, not missing a beat. "I hear hypothermia's a great way to lose weight." Celine was about to comment when the door slid open, revealing Yazel Terk, engineer extraordinaire and part-time mad scientist. He looked like he'd been up for 3 days straight, his hair a bird's nest of chaos. "Sorry I'm late," Terk said, looking anything but apologetic. "I got hung up with the Vyerks. They're not thrilled with our plan." "Shocking," Anton drawled. Terk ignored him, turning to Celine. "We've got a narrow window to pull this off. The Vyerks are threatening to introduce a new strain if we don't return their technology. Because that's not petty," Mira muttered. "We've got one shot to stabilize the ecosystem," Terk continued. "And it involves rerouting all available power to the black hole generator. We'll have to shut down everything else temporarily." "Everything?" Celine asked, her eyebrows shooting up. "As in life support, only for a few minutes," Terk assured her, his confidence sounding more like a prayer than a promise. "Minutes we might not have," Anton pointed out. Celine rubbed her temples again, feeling a headache brewing. "All right, what's the worst-case scenario? Everything implodes and we get to meet our maker," Terk replied with disturbing nonchalance. "But hey, at least it'll be quick." "Not sure that's comforting," Jack said as he returned, having caught the tail end of the conversation. "It's the best shot we've got," Terk insisted. "Unless anyone has a better idea." Silence settled over the room, the kind that comes when everyone realizes they are about to do something monumentally stupid but can't think of a better alternative. "All right," Celine said, taking a deep breath. "Let's prep for this insanity. Jax, get to the control room and stand by. Mira, keep monitoring the pathogen. Anton, make sure everyone knows what's about to happen. We don't need any surprises." "Besides the giant black hole?" Anton asked, his sarcasm sharper than a plasma cutter. "Exactly," Celine replied, heading for the door. "Terk, with me. Let's get this set up before the Vyerks decide to expedite our extinction." They moved through the station's guts, weaving through corridors that had seen better days. The station groaned like an old man getting out of bed, but at least it was still holding together. "So, what's the chance this works?" Celine asked as they walked. "About as likely as finding an honest politician," Terk replied, his grin a mix of mischief and madness. "Then why do it? Because when your back's against the wall, you either push back or get crushed. And I'd rather take a swing than just stand here and watch." Celine nodded, appreciating the sentiment even if the execution left something to be desired. "Let's just make sure we're swinging in the right direction." Reaching the control room, they set to work, fingers flying over controls, redirecting power from across the station to the black hole generator. Every system flickered, the lights dimming to a ghostly glow. "All right, Jax," Celine said, her voice echoing through the comms. "We're ready on our end." "Just say the word." "About as ready as I'll ever be," Jax replied, the comms crackling with static. The countdown began, each number ticking by with the speed of a glacier. Celine could feel her heart pounding in time with the station's erratic hums and groans. 3, 2, 1, now," Jax called. Celine hit the final switch and the station shuddered, a low, ominous rumble reverberating through the walls. The air seemed to thicken, tension vibrating like a live wire. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a surge of energy coursed through the station, a crackling wave that made every hair on Celine's body stand on end. The black hole generator roared to life, a tiny, controlled singularity spinning at its heart. "Hold it together," Celine murmured, staring at the readouts, her breath caught in her throat. The power draw was immense, the station teetering on the edge of collapse as systems struggled to compensate. The lights flickered, and for a horrifying second everything went dark. Then, with a lurch that felt like the universe itself taking a deep breath, the system stabilized. The lights returned, brighter and steadier than before. "Did it work?" Jax asked, his voice breaking the silence like a welcome embrace. "The ecosystem stabilizing," Terk confirmed, exhaling a breath he'd apparently been holding for the past century. "We did it." A cheer went up from the comms, the relief palpable even through the crackling static. Celine allowed herself a small smile, though the weight of everything else still loomed. "All right, let's get everything back online before the Vyerks decide to drop by for tea," she ordered, already moving to reset the controls. As they worked, the realization that they'd managed to pull off the impossible began to sink in. They'd bought themselves more time, a precious commodity in a universe that seemed hell-bent on killing them. Not bad for a bunch of misfits, Terk said, his voice a mix of pride and exhaustion. Not bad at all, Celine agreed, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the rising temperature. The Vyerks, however, wouldn't be put off forever. They'd be back and they'd bring their threats with them. But for now, they had a reprieve and Celine intended to make the most of it. "Come on," she said, nudging Terk. "Let's go see how the rest of our merry band of survivors is doing." As they made their way back to Lab 4, Celine couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. But for the moment, they'd managed to keep the universe's grim sense of humor at bay. And that was something. The Kursk Aegis station was buzzing like a hive of anxious bees, the air thick with tension and the smell of burnt wiring. The crew was riding the high of their recent success with the black hole generator, but no one was under any illusions. They'd bought themselves a bit of time, sure, but the universe wasn't done playing its cruel little jokes just yet. Dr. Celine Voss paced the length of Lab 4, her mind a flurry of thoughts that spun faster than the singularity they'd conjured. She was waiting for the next shoe to drop, because on the Kursk Aegis, you could count on at least a few more shoes falling before the day was out. Mira was glued to her terminal, eyes fixed on the numbers that flickered across her screen like a desperate gambler praying for a jackpot. "The pathogen's still spreading," she muttered, not looking up. "At this rate, we'll all be glowing more than the food we're not supposed to eat." Anton, lounging in a chair with the kind of casualness reserved for lunatics or those who'd completely given up, snorted. "At least we won't need nightlights anymore. Silver linings, right? The Vyerks could drop by any moment with their idea of a welcome basket," Celine said, ignoring Anton's gallows humor. "I doubt it's filled with muffins. Probably more of their lovely bioweapons," Jax added, appearing in the doorway. He was carrying a stack of printouts, most likely filled with more bad news. "I swear, every time I see one of those, I feel like I'm reading a horror story. Spoiler, we all die at the end." "Cheery as always," Mira said, trying to suppress a smile. "What do those say?" Same old," Jax replied, tossing the papers onto a cluttered desk. "Pathogens spreading, Vyerks are getting antsy and we're running out of time. Also, we're nearly out of coffee. That might be the real catastrophe." Celine stopped pacing and rubbed her temples. They needed a miracle, or at least something that looked like one. The station couldn't hold out much longer against the spread of the pathogen, and with the Vyerks breathing down their necks, options were limited. Terk wandered in, looking more like a sleep-deprived vagrant than the engineer he was. "Well, any new bright ideas, or are we just going to ride this train straight off a cliff?" "Thinking about giving the whole place a new look," Anton said dryly. "How about minimalist space debris, guaranteed to be the talk of the galaxy?" "Very avant-garde," Celine replied, her tone as flat as a lifeless planet. "Seriously, though, we need a solution and fast." Mira glanced up from her terminal, eyes meeting Celine's. "There might be a way," she said slowly, as if the words were reluctant to leave her mouth. "But it's risky." "Define risky, as in might not work or will definitely kill us all?" Jax asked, leaning against the wall. "Somewhere in between," Mira replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "If we isolate part of the station, we could quarantine the infected sections, buy ourselves more time to deal with the pathogen." "And by isolate, you mean?" Celine prompted, dreading the answer. Mira hesitated, glancing at Terk. "We'd have to sacrifice those parts of the station, shut them down completely. Live support, power, everything." "Just when I thought we were out of bad ideas," Anton quipped, though his voice lacked its usual bite. "It's the only way to prevent the pathogen from spreading to vital systems," Mira continued, her expression hardening with determination. "It's either that or we risk losing the whole station." Silence settled over the room, the kind that spoke louder than words. Celine felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical force. They were talking about abandoning part of their home, possibly dooming anyone left behind. "What about the people in those sections?" Jax asked, voicing the thought on everyone's mind. They'd need to evacuate. Get to safe zones before we seal them off, Terk explained, his voice steady but grim. Assuming they're not already infected, Anton added, ever the ray of sunshine. Celine turned to face her crew, each of them looking like they'd aged a decade in the past Ior. It's a hell of a choice, but it might be our only shot. So, we're seriously going to do this? Jax asked, looking like he was still hoping for someone to jump in with a more palatable option. Unless someone has a better idea, Celine replied, though she knew none was coming. All right, Terk said, taking a deep breath. Let's get it done. We'll start with the outer sectors, try to contain this thing before it gets any worse. Because how could it possibly get worse? Anton snarked, though he was already moving to help. The crew sprang into action, each of them falling into their roles like actors in a well-rehearsed tragedy. Mira coordinated with the station's comms, her voice crackling through the speakers as she relayed instructions to the rest of the crew. Jax headed to the control room, his usual optimism replaced with a grim resolve. Celine stayed behind, her eyes scanning the maps and readouts that covered every available surface. The station was a labyrinth of corridors and compartments, each one a potential death trap if the pathogen wasn't contained. Outside the walls of Lab 4, the station's corridors were buzzing with activity. Crew members hurried to gather what they could from the soon-to-be quarantined sections, their faces a mix of fear and determination. The Kursk Aegis might have been a creaking relic, but it was their home, and leaving parts of it behind felt like abandoning a comrade on the battlefield. Terk and Anton worked on the terminals, redirecting power and sealing bulkheads with the precision of a surgeon with a very shaky hand. Never thought I'd have to play God with a space station, Terk muttered, his fingers a blur over the controls. Funny thing is, I always thought you had a God complex, Anton replied, though there was no malice in his words this time, just tired acceptance. As the minutes ticked by, Celine felt the tension in her chest coil tighter, like a spring wound to its breaking point. Each bulkhead that sealed was a small death, a piece of their world being cut away. Finally, Mira's voice echoed through the comms, a gentle reminder that the universe, despite its vastness, had a twisted sense of humor. All set, Celine. We're as ready as we'll ever be. All right, Celine said, her voice steady even as her heart raced. Let's do this. Everyone clear the quarantine zones. We don't have time to waste. The announcement spread through the station like wildfire, crew members rushing to evacuate the designated sections. The corridors became a flurry of movement, the air crackling with urgency and unspoken fears. In the control room, Jax monitored the evacuation, his eyes darting between screens like a conductor trying to keep a symphony from descending into chaos. Looks like we're almost clear, he reported, his voice carrying through the comms. Good, Celine replied, though good felt like a strange word for the situation. Once everyone's out, seal the sections. The seconds stretched into eternity, each one a reminder of the gravity of their decision. Finally, Jax's voice cut through the tension, a lifeline in the maelstrom. All clear, sealing in 3, 2, 1. A series of dull thuds reverberated through the station as bulkheads slid into place, cutting off the infected sections from the rest of the Kursk Aegis. Celine watched the indicators on the map turn red, each one a symbol of their loss and their determination to survive. It's done, Jax said, his voice carrying a weight that matched the silence settling over the station. Celine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her shoulders sagging with fatigue. They'd taken a monumental gamble, one that could mean the difference between life and death. Now what? Anton asked, the question hanging in the air like a shadow. Now we wait and hope this buys us enough time to find a real solution, Celine replied, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. They gathered in Lab 4, a somber group united by their shared desperation. The station felt different now, quieter, as if mourning the pieces they'd sacrificed. But there was life here still, a flickering flame in the darkness. Mira continued to monitor the pathogen, her eyes never straying far from the terminal. Spread slowing, she reported, though no one had dared to ask. For now, at least. A small victory, Terk said, though his tone suggested he knew it was a fragile one. It's something, Celine agreed, though her mind was already racing ahead, trying to chart a course through the uncertainty. The Vyerks, with their impatience and threats, were still out there, looming like a storm on the horizon. The pathogen was contained but not eradicated. They'd won a battle, not the war. But for now, they were alive, and in a universe that seemed hell-bent on snuffing them out, that was no small feat. Let's get some rest, Celine said, her voice more tired than she'd like to admit. We'll need our wits about us for whatever comes next. As they dispersed, Celine lingered in Lab 4, her gaze sweeping over the room that had become the heart of their operation. The Kursk Aegis was a battered, beleaguered relic, but it was their home, and as long as they were still breathing, they'd fight to keep it that way. In the quiet aftermath, Celine felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected: hope. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A spark in the dark. And sometimes a spark was all you needed to light the way forward. Lab 4 on the Kursk Aegis was far busier than it had any right to be, considering the station was on the brink of either becoming a ghost ship or a smoldering heap of space debris. Celine Voss found herself at the center of it all, reluctantly playing the role of a conductor trying to keep the orchestra from setting itself on fire. She stood over a cluttered workstation, surrounded by screens displaying data she had no time to fully digest. I always loved a good apocalypse, Anton muttered, leaning against a console with a nonchalance that only someone utterly resigned to their fate could muster. Gives you perspective on how much you really hate your job. Jax chuckled, though it came out more like a dry cough. Speak for yourself. I was hoping to get out of here before the whole permanent vacation part kicked in. Yeah, well, seems like the universe had other plans, Celine replied, her voice carrying a hint of sarcasm. And those plans apparently involve us, a pathogen and a severe coffee shortage. Just another day on the Kursk Aegis, Mira chimed in, eyes glued to her terminal. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, which was probably true. Speaking of crises, I might have something, and it's a real head-scratcher. Celine turned towards Mira, her interest piqued despite the fatigue that draped over her like a lead blanket. All right, hit me with the good news, or bad news. Honestly, I'm past the point of caring about the difference. Mira tapped a few keys, pulling up a series of data charts. The pathogen, it's doing something weird, like really weird. It's not just spreading like wildfire, it's also fixing things. Fixing things, Celine echoed, skepticism dripping from her words like a leaky faucet. Yeah, the little bastard is a multitasker, Mira replied, unable to keep the incredulity out of her voice. It seems to be repairing cellular damage too. The infected are showing signs of rapid healing like nothing I've seen before. The universe's idea of a sick joke, Anton commented, shaking his head. Killer and healer, all in one handy-dandy space plague. Terk wandered over, frowning as he peered at the screen. So you're telling me we've got a pathogen with a split personality disorder? Pretty much, Mira confirmed, rubbing her temples as if trying to massage away the headache of this new revelation. We might be able to harness it, use it to our advantage. And how do we do that without blowing ourselves to kingdom come? Jax asked, raising an eyebrow. Celine thought for a moment, the gears in her mind turning despite the exhaustion that threatened to drag her under. If we can isolate the part of the pathogen responsible for healing, we might be able to create an antidote, or at least a treatment. That's a big if, Terk pointed out, skepticism coloring his tone. Yeah, well, our options are pretty limited, Celine shot back. I say we give it a shot. We've got nothing to lose, except maybe a few more hours of this soul-crushing existence. Anton snorted, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth despite the dire situation. Always the optimist, Celine. Someone's got to be, she replied, though her grin was more of the gallows humor variety. Mira began typing furiously, her eyes glued to the screen. I'll start working on isolating the healing component. It's a long shot, but it's better than sitting around waiting for the Vyerks to redecorate the station with our entrails. Celine nodded, a spark of hope igniting in her chest despite the shadow of doubt that lurked at the edges of her mind. All right, let's get to it. If this works, we might just pull off the impossible. As the team got to work, the station around them buzzed with a frenetic energy, the kind that only came when things were either about to go very right or very, very wrong. In the back of her mind, Celine knew they were still on borrowed time. The Vyerks wouldn't wait forever, and the pathogen was still a ticking time bomb. But for now, they had a thread to cling to, a sliver of a chance in a universe that seemed hell-bent on extinguishing them. "Hey, Terk," Jax called from across the lab, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "Think this pathogen has a setting to cure hangovers too?" Terk barked a laugh, shaking his head. "If it does, I'll bottle it and retire rich on a beach planet somewhere. Assuming we survive, that is." "Well, there's a first for everything," Anton chimed in, "even surviving our own stupidity." The mood in the lab was still tense, but the prospect of a breakthrough had infused the crew with a cautious optimism. They worked side by side, each member of the ragtag team throwing themselves into the task with a determination born from desperation. Eyes blurred together, a haze of data, frantic calculations, and the occasional heated argument. Celine lost track of time, her focus narrowing to the task at hand, her mind a fortress against the encroaching weariness. There was no room for doubt, no time for hesitation. Finally, Mira let out a triumphant shout, drawing the attention of the entire lab. "I think I've got something," she announced, barely containing her excitement. Celine hurried over, peering at the screen over Mira's shoulder. "Is it what we need?" Mira nodded, her eyes bright with a mixture of relief and exhilaration. "I've isolated the healing component. If we can synthesize it, we might just have a fighting chance." "Well, it's about damn time," Anton muttered, though the tension in his shoulders visibly eased. Celine felt a surge of adrenaline, a sense of purpose reigniting the fire in her veins. "All right, let's get this party started. If we can pull this off, we might just live to see another day." Terk clapped Celine on the back, a rare grin spreading across his face. "Looks like you might actually be onto something, Voss." "Yeah, well, don't get your hopes up," Celine replied, though inwardly she felt a flicker of pride. "Let's see if this miracle cure of Ior's actually works before we start planning our victory parade." The team sprang into action, each member working with a renewed sense of urgency. They had a plan, a sliver of hope, and for the first time in what felt like forever they were moving forward. As they worked, the station's comms crackled to life, a reminder that while they were making progress, the outside world and its threats were still very much a reality. "This is Katar of the Vyerks Collective," came the voice, a harsh reminder of their precarious situation. "You have 2 standard cycles to return our technology. Failure to comply will result in your immediate extermination." Celine sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Always a pleasure, Katar," she muttered under her breath, though the comms were thankfully muted. "We need to get this done," Jax said, his voice low but urgent. "The Vyerks aren't known for their patience." "No pressure, right?" Anton quipped, though his voice lacked the usual sarcasm. "None whatsoever," Celine replied. "Let's get this synthesized and pray it works before the Vyerks decide they're done playing nice." The team moved with a single-minded focus, their actions a blur of controlled chaos. They were racing against the clock, against the universe itself, but they refused to back down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they had the synthesized compound. Celine held the vial in her hands, the weight of their hopes and fears contained within the fragile glass. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions roiling within her. "Let's see if this works." They administered the compound to a group of the infected, each of them holding their breath, waiting for a sign, a miracle, a disaster, anything. The moment stretched on, each second an eternity, until finally there was movement. The infected began to stir, their eyes fluttering open, confusion and awareness returning in equal measure. "It's working," Mira breathed, her voice a mix of disbelief and awe. Anton let out a whoop of triumph, clapping Terk on the back. "Looks like you might get that beach planet after all, Terk." Celine allowed herself a small smile, though the weight of the Vyerks' threat still loomed large. They'd won a battle, but the war was far from over. "We need to produce more," Celine said, her mind already racing ahead to the next steps. "We've got to distribute this to everyone we can before the Vyerks make their move." The team nodded, each of them ready to dive back into the fray. They had a lifeline, a chance, and they weren't about to let it slip through their fingers. As they worked, Celine couldn't help but think of the irony that a pathologically hostile universe might just hand them the key to survival in the form of a deadly pathogen. Life, it seemed, had a sense of humor, and for once it was working in their favor. "All right, folks," Celine said, her voice carrying the weight of their shared struggle. "Let's get this done. We've got lives to save and an apocalypse to avert." As they moved forward, the flicker of hope burned a little brighter, a beacon in the relentless darkness. They were the crew of the Kursk Aegis, battered, bruised, but undeniably defiant. And for now, that was enough. The Kursk Aegis was a floating junkyard of desperation and dreams that never quite took off. If space had a landfill, this station would be it, a testament to humanity's stubborn refusal to give up even when the universe was flipping them the middle finger. Flickering lights and an unstable ecosystem due to alien bioweapons. Check. A pathogen with a personality disorder. Double check. And don't even get started on the coffee situation. People were ready to start bartering organs for a decent cup. "Doctor." Celine Voss stood in what passed for Lab 4, the team's command center for this interstellar circus act. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but she forced them open wider, fighting the fatigue that tugged at her like a persistent toddler. "All right, people, we've got a miracle cure to mass produce. Let's get cracking before the Vyerks decide it's redecorating time." Anton leaned against a console, arms crossed, looking as casual as one could when faced with obliteration. "You think the Vyerks will be impressed by our ingenuity or just pissed we turned their bioweapon into a band-aid?" Celine arched an eyebrow. "Maybe both. But let's shoot for impressed, shall we?" Mira was typing furiously at her terminal, eyes darting across the screen like a squirt on caffeine. "I've got the synthesis process down, but it's going to take all the resources we've got left. If we screw this up, we'll be out of options faster than a politician at a truth convention." "No pressure then," Jax muttered, shooting a glance at Terk, who was tinkering with the black hole generator like it was his personal pet project. "Terk, you think you could whip up a miracle in that thing?" Terk chuckled without looking up. "If by miracle you mean not implode the station, then yeah, I'm your guy." Celine clapped her hands together, trying to inject some energy into the team. "All right, let's do this. We need to turn this death trap into a haven, or at least something less likely to explode." The lab buzzed with activity, each member of the crew diving into their tasks with the kind of frenzied determination only imminent death could inspire. The ticking clock wasn't just metaphorical. It was pounding in everyone's ears like a bass drum, keeping time with their racing hearts. As the minutes slipped away, the comms crackled again. Katar's voice came through, grating and impatient. "One cycle remaining, humans. Deliver the technology or face the consequences." "Always with the menacing ultimatums," Celine muttered, rolling her eyes. "I've had more pleasant conversations with my dentist," Anton snorted. "At least your dentist just wants your money, not your life." "Focus, people," Mira interjected, her voice snapping like a whip. "I've got the first batch ready for testing. Let's see if this thing works on a larger scale." Celine took the vial, the liquid inside shimmering with potential. It was their Hail Mary, their last-ditch effort to avoid becoming cosmic roadkill. She handed it to Anton, who had graciously volunteered, or been volunteered, depending on who you asked, to play guinea pig. "Bottoms up," Anton said with a mock toast before downing the contents. He grimaced, then smacked his lips. Tastes like a cocktail made by a blind bartender. Stay still, Mira instructed, her eyes glued to the monitors. They watched as the reading stabilized, then improved. Anton's vitals ticked upward, his body responding to the cure like a plant to sunlight. "It's working," Mira announced, her voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. "We've got something." Cheers erupted, echoing off the lab walls. For a moment, hope felt tangible, like a forgotten friend making an unexpected visit. Celine allowed herself a rare smile, but the victory felt fragile, like a soap bubble in a hurricane. "Let's not break out the champagne just yet. We still have to distribute this across the station and convince the Vyerks not to turn us into space dust." "One step at a time," Terk said, clapping Anton on the back. "Let's get this distributed before Katar decides to take matters into his own hands." The team worked with a precision that belied their exhaustion, each member moving like a cog in a well-oiled machine. Vials were filled, distributed, administered. The cure spread like a ripple, touching lives and sparking a renewal of hope in the beleaguered crew. As the last of the infected began to recover, regaining strength and clarity, the sense of victory grew, cautiously creeping into their bones. But like any good horror story, the sense of impending doom never quite vanished. The comms unit crackled into life once more, Katar's voice dripping with impatience. "Your time is up." Celine took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Katar, this is Dr. Celine Voss. We've managed to neutralize the pathogen and have no intention of using the technology against you or anyone else. I propose a trade, piece for piece." There was a long, heavy silence on the line, the kind that made every second feel like a lifetime. Then a sound that could only be described as an electronic growl came through the speakers. "Explain." "We've turned your weapon into a cure. It's a solution, not a threat. We're offering to share this with you in exchange for our lives and continued neutrality." Anton smirked, whispering to Mira, "Bet he's scratching his head right now trying to figure out if this is a trap." Mira nodded, eyes fixed on the comms unit. "Or just wondering how the hell we pulled it off." Finally, Katar spoke again, his tone a mix of suspicion and reluctant intrigue. "Your cleverness is noted, humans. We will consider your proposal." Celine gave a nod, though the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. "Consider quickly. We don't have much time left before things get irreversible." With that, the comms fell silent once more, leaving the crew in a limbo of hope and dread. They'd made their play, and now all they could do was wait and pray the universe was feeling magnanimous. As they settled into the uneasy silence following the exchange, a notification pinged on Mira's terminal. Her brow furrowed as she scanned the incoming data. "Looks like the pathogen isn't the only thing fixing itself. The station's systems are stabilizing too." Anton raised an eyebrow. "You saying this place might actually stop trying to kill us?" "Miracles happen," Mira shrugged, though her tone suggested she'd believe it when she saw it. "Let's not hold our breath," Jack said, though his grin was hopeful. "We might just suffocate." The silence that followed was heavy with shared relief and the gnawing anxiety of the unknown. They had survived the crisis, at least for now, and every extra moment felt like a stolen gift. Then the comms crackled to life again, and Katar's voice filled the lab, this time carrying a tone that could almost be described as begrudging respect. "We accept your terms. The Vyerks Collective will withdraw. You are formidable adversaries." Celine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Acknowledged, Katar. We appreciate your reason." The comms fell silent, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the lab was filled with an uncertain peace. They'd done it. Against the odds, against the universe's perverse sense of humor, they had survived. "Well," Anton said, breaking the silence with his characteristic nonchalance, "looks like we live to fight another day." Celine nodded, though her mind was already racing ahead, planning, preparing. "Let's get this place patched up and figure out how we're going to keep it that way." The team dispersed, each member returning to their duties with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in days, the threat of imminent doom didn't hang over their heads like a guillotine. As they worked, Celine couldn't help but reflect on the irony of it all. that a weapon of mass destruction had become their salvation. The universe might be a cruel and capricious mistress, but today, at least, she'd thrown them a bone. "All right, folks," Celine said, her voice carrying a mix of relief and determination. "We've got a second chance. Let's make sure we use it." The crew of the Kursk Aegis nodded, each of them ready to face whatever came next. They were battered, they were bruised, but they were undeniably alive. And in the grand scheme of things, that was no small victory. As the station settled into its new, precarious stability, a sense of camaraderie and hope began to take root. They might be floating through the unforgiving void of space, but they weren't alone. They had each other, and sometimes, in a universe hell-bent on wiping you out, that was all you really needed. "Hey, Terk," Jax called, a teasing lilt in his voice. "Think we can finally get that beach planet vacation?" Terk chuckled, wiping his hands on his grease-stained overalls. "If we survive the next crisis, drinks are on me." "Always the optimist," Anton said, though his grin was genuine. Celine watched them with a quiet sense of satisfaction. They'd been pushed to the brink, but they'd come out stronger, together. "All right," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. "Let's get back to work." As the crew of the Kursk Aegis dove back into their tasks, the flickering lights overhead seemed a little less ominous, the shadows a little less threatening. They had a second chance, a fragile piece, and a fighting spirit that refused to be extinguished. And for now, in this corner of the universe, that was enough. The Kursk Aegis limped along the ragged edge of space like a drunken sailor trying to find his way home after an evening with the bottle. The station's lights blinked with a frequency that could give a strobe light a run for its money, and its air was filled with the delightful aroma of burnt circuits and despair. But for the crew, it was home, if your idea of home included the occasional risk of death by implosion or alien dismemberment. In Lab 4, the atmosphere was a mix of exhausted relief and cautious optimism, a rare cocktail of emotions that somehow managed to taste better than anything Anton had mixed up in his makeshift bar. Celine stood at the helm of this motley crew of misfits, trying to suppress the simmering headache that had been her constant companion for the past few cycles. She watched as Mira and Jax worked on stabilizing the station's systems, their fingers flying over terminals with the kind of speed and precision that suggested they were either highly skilled or just really, really tired of being almost dead. "How's it looking, Jax?" Celine asked, sipping on what passed for coffee around here. If the universe had a sense of humor, this brew was its punchline. Jax spun his chair around, giving her a thumbs-up and a grin that could only be described as shit-eating. "We're holding steady. Might even have the life support systems running like they're supposed to." He paused, considering. "Of course, that's assuming the universe doesn't decide to fart in our general direction." "That's always a risk," Celine agreed, setting her mug down with a soft clink that resonated through the lab. Anton, ever the picture of casual disinterest, leaned against a stack of crates, watching the proceedings with a bemused expression. "You know, I've always wondered what it would be like to live somewhere that isn't actively trying to kill me. But then, where's the fun in that?" "Right," Mira chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she fiddled with a piece of alien tech that looked suspiciously like a torture device. "I mean, who doesn't love a good adrenaline rush every time you open an airlock or sneeze too hard?" Terk wandered in, wiping grease from his hands onto his already stained coveralls. "Well, at least we're not dead, right? I'd call that a win." Celine nodded, though her thoughts were already drifting to the next crisis on the horizon. "We've got a breather, but let's not get too comfortable." The Vyerks might have backed off, but they're not exactly known for their forgiving nature. "Yeah," Anton said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "I mean, they did call us formidable adversaries. That's practically a compliment coming from them." "Sure," Mira replied, rolling her eyes. "Like being called the least disgusting dumpster by a raccoon." The group shared a laugh, the kind that comes easily when you've just narrowly avoided cosmic obliteration. But beneath the humor was a shared understanding of what they'd been through and what might still come. As the crew went about their tasks, Celine found herself reflecting on the cost of their victory. It was hard not to, when every corner of the station carried the scars of their struggle, and while they'd managed to make it through with their lives and most of their sanity intact, the experience had left its mark. "So, what's next, fearless leader?" Jax asked, his tone half teasing, half serious. Celine sighed, running a hand through her hair as she considered the question. "First, we make sure this place doesn't implode or explode or do anything else that ends with plode. Then we figure out how to keep the Vyerks at bay." "Guess that means no beach planet vacation just yet, huh?" Terk quipped, his grin as irrepressible as ever. "Afraid not," Celine replied, though there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "But hey, maybe we can put in for some hazard pay. Assuming there's anyone left to pay us," Anton added, chuckling. "Hell, assuming there's anything left of the economy at all." As they settled into the rhythm of their tasks, an unexpected notification pinged on the comms unit, drawing everyone's attention. Celine frowned, stepping over to the terminal as she keyed in her access code. The screen lit up with a message from the Vyerks, an official communique which in itself was odd. The Vyerks had always preferred threats and ultimatums over friendly chit-chat, a fact that made this development all the more suspicious. "Looks like we've got mail," Celine announced, glancing over her shoulder at the crew. "And it's from our favorite galactic overlords." Anton arched an eyebrow. "Did we forget to pay the rent? Maybe they just want to congratulate us on not dying," Jax suggested, though his tone was more hopeful than optimistic. Celine opened the message, her eyes scanning the text with growing disbelief. The Vyerks were proposing something unprecedented: diplomatic channels, an exchange of knowledge, perhaps even an alliance. It was an invitation to dialogue, not war. "This can't be right," Celine muttered, rereading the message as if expecting it to transform into another death threat. "Well, I'll be damned," Terk said, peering over her shoulder. "Looks like we scared them into trying friendship. Or they've realized we're more useful alive than dead," Mira added, her skepticism as sharp as ever. Celine leaned back, contemplating the shift in their fortunes. "Whatever the reason, this is an opportunity. And after everything we've been through, I think we've earned a bit of good luck." "Yeah," Anton said, crossing his arms with a smirk. "And if they turn out to be lying, well, we've gotten pretty good at dealing with bad news, haven't we?" "True," Jax agreed, his grin as bright as the stars outside. "Though I guess it wouldn't hurt to brush up on our intergalactic diplomacy." Mira glanced around the lab, taking in the faces of her fellow survivors. "You think this means we'll finally get some peace around here?" Celine shrugged, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe. Or maybe it just means a new kind of chaos. But whatever it is, we'll face it together." The crew nodded, a silent agreement passing between them. They'd faced death and come out the other side, bruised but unbroken. And while the future was as uncertain as ever, they were ready to meet it head-on. As the crew continued their work, each member lost in their tasks, Celine took a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this point. They'd started as a disparate group of individuals, each with their own agendas and motives. But through crisis and conflict, they'd become something more, a team, a family united by their shared struggles and victories. "We've come a long way," she said softly, almost to herself. "Yeah," Anton replied, overhearing her. "And with any luck, the road ahead won't be quite as rocky." Terk chuckled, giving him a playful nudge. "Don't jinx it, man. You know the universe loves a challenge." The laughter that followed was genuine, the sound of a group that had learned to find joy in the midst of chaos. And as they continued their work, the station felt a little less like a death trap and a bit more like a home. In the end, they'd survived, against the odds, against the universe's cruel sense of humor. They'd turned a weapon into a cure, enemies into allies, and a near disaster into a second chance. And in the vast, uncaring expanse of space, that was no small feat. As the crew of the Kursk Aegis settled into their new normal, Celine allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. They'd earned this peace, however temporary it might be. And for a group of underdogs floating through the void, that was a victory worth celebrating. "All right, team," Celine called, her voice carrying a note of determination and hope. "Let's get this place back in order and see what the universe throws at us next." With that, the crew returned to their tasks, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They'd conquered the impossible, turned foes into friends, and carved out a place for themselves in the stars. And in the grand scheme of things, that was enough. For now.